people living in Japan, what are your stories about neckbeards that have visited your country? She wasn't a neckbeard. She was a 16-year-old girl from Montana on a 1-year Rotary scholarship in a nearby town. She loved Inuyasha. She didn't fit into her small Montana town. She had felt lonely and isolated. She came to Japan, thinking that everyone would love manga and anime, that everyone loved Inuyasha in particular, and that she would be instantly understood, accepted, and loved. It might have all worked out if she'd been sent to a larger city, a place with the infrastructure to support gatherings of manga anime fans, and a way to get there. But there she was, stuck in the countryside, attending a second-rate high school, where the students were put off by her enthusiasm for things they had outgrown. She was depressed and angry. Her host family wanted me to help. I had lived there for 5 years. I had a pretty good understanding of the language and culture, and I did want to help, but she didn't want help. She wanted everything around her to change in order to fit her idea of what Japan should be like. She prized her Montana dream of Japan over the reality of Japan. I met with her a couple of times, and then she moved to a different host home and we lost touch. I hope she ended up choosing to accept the Japan that was, rather than rejecting it in favor of her fantasies. There's something about teenage girls in rural Montana and them being obsessed with Inuyasha. The more rural the town, the greater the number Inuyasha fangirls. Had a friend who was definitely a neckbeard move over there and do the English teacher thing. In his case, it ended up being a great thing. He ended up making a ton of friends at work, and his goofy funny demeanor was a hit with the kiddos. And now he's super passionate about teaching and goes out all the time with friends from work, who all think he's hilarious. One of those rare cases where the life experiences really helped someone grow up and find their place. Thanks for the awards, but treat yourself to a coffee next time. Wish I had a medal to give. Very wholesome and uplifting to hear compared to the other, expected and asked for, cringe stories. Happy to hear it all worked out for him. I went on a 2-week vacation to Japan a few years ago. Obviously I visited the hotspots like Akihabara and Harajuku. I didn't really see anyone that fit the traditional white neckbeard description, but one of the top recommendations on TripAdvisor was a Maid cafe in Akihabara, so we decided to check it out. We weren't the only tourists there. There was another American couple that looked just as weirded out as we were. The place had no windows. The food was terrible and overpriced, and the maids honestly didn't spend much time around us. The creepy thing was that the place was filled with creepy looking, much older men that looked like they hung out there all day. At one point we saw one of them go into a back room with one of the maids for quite a while. Apparently if you bought an $80 bottle of wine you could cuddle with one of the maids. I don't know how old these girls were, but I got the impression that they were high school students. Yeah, most Japanese high schools wouldn't let a student work at a maid cafe, so the other commenter is right that they are mostly 18 plus. And I'm not surprised they didn't give you much attention, since they knew you wouldn't be regulars. The vast majority will come over and geek out for a week in specific entertainment districts and tourist traps, which is pretty much live and let live for me. Some neckbeard do end up moving to Japan though, and they definitely exist in free on-board expat English teacher circles. That being said, there aren't really any stories that I know of that are particularly noteworthy. Most of them come here, go through culture shock and realize that Japan isn't all it was cracked up to be, and go home once they have had their fill. Some get stuck in bad marriages, have kids, and end up staying in low-paying English teaching jobs for the rest of their life since they have no other marketable skills career options. And that lot is pretty sad. A small but notable percentage will break down because of the lack of a social support system, poor mental health care, which is always sad to see as well. I lived out in the country in the 90s for a year, 1-hour train from Kyoto, and there were no foreigners at all in my town, which was nice. However, not exactly a neckbeard encounter, but similar attitude. In Kyoto I was walking through a narrow street to my favorite bar, Pig and Whistle, and this thin guy in his 30s saw me and got visibly angry. He was looking for a direction to go as if to escape, but being a narrow street, there was nowhere for him to go. Once I got close to him I smiled and said, "Hey, how's it going?" and he replied with a twisted face, "I'm not here to talk to you," and rushed past me. I was really confused. but I think he had some fantasy that the entire country and experience was just for him, and I was somehow ruining that delusion for him for merely appearing in the landscape. On the flip side, in the same area I had a Texan tourist sporting a 20-gallon hat and cowboy boots make a beeline for me just to say hello in a fancy to meet you here partner fashion. His Japanese with a Texan accent was freaking hysterical. Well, pardon me. Sumimash tnnnnn-taa. Lost it reading and imagining a Texan speaking god-awful Japanese and firing his pistols into the air. Most of the comments on here already said it better than me. The tourist trap districts are what, as the name suggests, attract all of the tourists. The weebs neckbeards go to Akihabara. The fashion students go to Harajuku. Huge letdown, by the way, and the social media tourists flock to Shinjuku because of all the red light district places that were featured on BuzzFeed. I don't really have any stories about anyone in particular. I saw plenty of cringy tourists and people making fools of themselves, especially if it was for the sake of Instagram or YouTube. They'll take up the entire two-way sidewalk in those cases. Full stop. But for the most part it was generally limited to those areas. You go to any real tourist destination in Japan and it will almost entirely consist of Japanese people. The country has a lot of wonderful places that are not really advertised to foreigners unless you dig for them. I have a friend who I met online through anime that lives in Japan and works at one of the manga shops around Akihabara. According to him, lots of English-speaking foreigners come in and make a huge obnoxious deal about the lolicon section in the shop. Like he pretty much expects it at this point. If he sees someone non-Asian come in, that they will go straight to that area and start snickering and sneaking pictures with their group. Technically photography isn't allowed, but he doesn't like confronting them about it after a few bad experiences, so he just pretends not to notice. He still groans about the "Don't Lewd the Lowly Dragon" memes a few years ago, since they always had Kana books on display due to popularity and it was like a giant beacon to tourists to be obnoxious. They also bought those books in particular more than any Japanese. The Japanese customers mask up and say nothing. Just a minor thing I've learned. When I lived in Japan in the 1990s, my Japanese friend took me to a condom kiosk in Tokyo, which was supposed to be shocking and edgy. It just had lots of different types of condoms in novelty colors, which was cool, but to me it wasn't shocking. Some of the magazines and manga sold in convenience stores, however. Even when I was visiting, I saw tourists really screw up the social etiquette. Not in a bad way, but way too formal in everyday situations. Not really following what the locals were doing. Things like very deep bows for completing a transaction at 7-Eleven. So nothing bad, just funny to watch. I lived in Japan for a year with my sister in 2008. I was on a working holiday visa. I was supposed to work only part-time, but part-time to them was 40 hours a week. I had a fun job though. I worked in a little bakery in Nishiazubu. I am a trained pastry chef. Minimum wage was $10. LOL. So I didn't make a lot of money, but it was enough for some fun trips with my sister. And the people who owned the bakery were very kind in letting me take some time off to experience Japan. I never came across any sketchy or weird tourists. In fact, I don't recall seeing many. I actually had a wonderful experience. I'm so happy I went. I went back to visit in 2018, and I can tell you there were like a bazillion more tourists. I also went to more of the tourist-y places because I went with friends who had never been. Though I recall going to Enoshima and seeing like no tourists. I went to Harajuku for some shopping by myself, and I went to go have lunch and the restaurant was filled with tourists. Some of them were incredibly rude as well, getting annoyed at the poor waitress because she didn't understand what they were asking for, talking really slow and really loud, like that was going to help, then loudly complaining from their table after she left. I think she was glad that I was able to order my food in Japanese. She gave me a big smile. My Japanese is very basic, but I spoke with confidence, so that probably helped. TDLR. 2008. No problem with tourists. 2018. Lots of tourists but only in the tourist Y areas. Nothing irks me more than people going to a country where English isn't native and then getting annoyed that people don't speak English. There's actually more Japanese neckbeards than foreign ones, from my experiences there. It's not unusual to see some greasy Japanese dude walk out of a shop with a bunch of lowly hentai he purchased in Akihabara. There's a large variety of anime and video game stores there, and there's no limit to the number of neckbeards you'll see. You'll often see foreign folks posing at the entrance to the junior station for pictures, but otherwise that's about it. When my California friend was visiting, who is a super neckbeard anime collector, I took him to a Maid cafe and almost died laughing as they dressed up this former US Marine in cat apparel for a photoshoot with some of the Maid employees. One time a neckbeard wandered into the school I worked at and started walking around. The gate security guy assumed he was a part of the foreign language exchange club, Genki, lots of neckbeards there too, and just let him in. He just wandered around the school until a teacher finally asked who he was and what he was doing there. I have no idea what he said, but the teacher took him to an English class and had the students practice asking him questions in English. Nobody got in trouble, but we did have a meeting a few days later about not allowing strangers onto the campus and to check everyone's work badges. I suppose no harm, no foul, but I was always freaked out at how some dude would be so socially clueless, literally just go into a gated school. Some douchy British guy kept talking about all the women he's been with and calling women different slurs. Apparently he had been known for treating women like crap while in Japan. I was the only girl in the group and he said I was offended because I was American. My Japanese friends agreed that he was a douche. Not exactly a neckbeard, but a total creep all the same. This is why a better question would be all Asian countries and their experience with creepy westerns. I love Thailand and SE Asia in general, but man, I can't get over seeing some of the creepy white dudes. Amazon Prime has a great mini-series called James May, Man in Japan. He goes off the beaten track and does a bunch of cool Japanese stuff. Lived in Japan for a few years, and now visit often for business and vacations. The weeb neckbeard types actually aren't that bad, and I rarely see them if I'm visiting outside major events. Yeah, you may see them visiting the tourist traps, but I can't think of a single moment that I witnessed something that stands out from the type being referenced. Though I'm sure there are horror stories out there. Even when I went for Tokyo Game Show, they tend to be pretty unnoticed in the crowds. Most times when I clock one on the subway, they keep quiet and respectful, which I guess, thinking about it, I'd kind of expect. If you go there for this infatuation of the country, you tend to at least try to adhere to customs. I assure you, with 100% confidence, there are other tourist types that are far more obvious and obnoxious. Yeah, that makes sense. Introverted and obsessed with Japan probably isn't a recipe for bad behavior. I don't live in Japan but spent about a month backpacking through the country back in 2016. I do have a short story. One day I was walking through Akihabara Electric Town, which is not really my scene, but I did want to see it at least. I visited some of the shops, some of the arcades, and walked around a bunch. Eventually I got a bit peckish, which is when I remembered that some of my friends told me to visit a Maid cafe, just to experience that sort of thing. So, I did, and got lunch there. It was a pretty creepy overall, but the food was surprisingly good, if a bit overpriced. The guy sitting 2 seats to the left of me had a freaking PC set up with a tower and swivel monitor. He was the stereotypical looking dude you might expect in a story like this. Overweight, with questionable body hair, attire, and so on. This guy was sitting there drinking a beer, watching anime on his PC. I sat there trying to humor the maid that I had selected since I had to, trying to not cringe at the guy sitting to the left of me. My maid would occasionally come over and talk to me in Japanese, make little hearts with her hands, which she asked me to duplicate, which I did once. Honestly, at that point I just wanted to get the heck out of there. The food was actually pretty good like I said, and I felt like I was studying a cultural oddity, so I didn't really mind being there. But, it was dang creepy like I said, and just weird. I will never forget that guy. How the heck do you even drag a bulky PC into a cafe like that? I mean, the logistics seem obvious, but, all that effort, why? I suspect this guy spends hours there every day and they accommodate him because he spends money there on a regular basis. But like, what? I've known people who saw Japan as their utopia. They believed that what happens in manga and anime is real in Japan. They need help. I lived in Japan, but it was a while ago, before the term neckbeard existed. There were definitely guys whose primary aim was to date Japanese women, with varying degrees of intent and success. There was one guy we thought was a real butthole because he was pretty mean and dismissive to his dates. We joked that he had some kind of a punch card. He was a pretty standard misogynist racist but was too attractive to be a neckbeard. Me and my friends went to Tokyo in 2018 and I was genuinely shocked to see more than one white guy wearing a trench coat, fedora and fingerless gloves at the same time. All of them were in the multi-story arcades. I honestly didn't know people like that actually existed, let alone left their parents' basements to go as far as a different nation. The community college I went to had an anime club, and there were people who wore some combination of neckbeard attire. However, unlike most neckbeards, they mostly minded their business playing D&D, UGR, or Magic the Gathering. It was very rare to have an incident with one of them. The first time I lived in Japan was as a student studying abroad. There was this guy in our group who was a pretty traditional weeb type, heavy, neckbeard, and not just into anime and otaku stuff, but it was his entire personality. He was also kind of rude and abrasive with a big know-it-all attitude about Japan, which was irritating since for most of us, including him, it was our first time in Japan. My friends and I would invite him to do stuff pretty regularly, but he always said I have homework, I can't come. He always said I have homework, not I have to study, which maybe is me being nitpicky and reading into things, but came across as childish to me. He'd post pictures regularly of him doing otaku stuff in places like Akihabara, never straying far from really tourist trap areas, so he actually just didn't want to hang out with us. All well and good, we aren't entitled to his time, but he never spent time with anyone on campus either. He was always alone, and he was never with any friends in his FB pictures. Towards the end of our time there he posted this rant on Facebook about how Japan let him down and he didn't think other people appreciated the real Japan the way he did, Japanese people included. I felt really bad for him, to be honest. He was kind of a social outcast among Westerners and clearly thought it was because of his hobbies, appearance and not his attitude. But clearly he wasn't able to fit in any better with Japanese people. I feel terrible knowing how excited he must have been about what finally getting to Japan would be like, and then it not living up to his dreams. I love Japan, and I always recommend people visit Japan, but you'll be the same person in Japan as you are anywhere. And like anywhere on earth, Japan has its pros and cons, and people who romanticize and idealize it will have a bad time. There's the pervert who pays girls to trample him and make him lick their shoes in Tokyo then share it on Twitter. Not to kink shame, but save that for a love motel. Some of us don't want to have to explain to our kids why that funny man's on a leash outside the subway. Yeah, that's why I don't let my kid watch goofy movies with Pluto in them. I don't have any specific stories, but I need to vent TBH. I'm a half Japanese person who grew up back and forth between NYC and Japan. Honestly, from my childhood up until hitting my 20s, most people I met or befriended or dated were weebs who only valued me for being Japanese. I think the difference now is that I've learned to stop engaging with people once that becomes apparent. I do love anime and video games, but honestly it's exhausting when every conversation is just about Japan, anime, blah blah blah. Then, they're disappointed or even argumentative when I point out that real life in Japan isn't like that. Yet our food is great and merch for your fave Japanese franchise is plentiful and cheaper, but government sucks, the work culture sucks, sexism and racism sucks, and also the environmental impact is probably unbelievably awful in regards to plastic. Ironic that our native religions focus on nature and yet every goddamn thing is made of and or wrapped in plastic. Did I mention the weeb male mindset towards women? Surprise. Just because I'm a Japanese woman doesn't mean I'm gonna be a submissive sex slave. And if I want to be, it's got nothing to do with race. As far as weebs in Japan, and I say weebs because I'm including women and men who aren't necessarily neckbeardy looking, I don't have too strong of an opinion. They will come and either have a reality check and go home, or they'll try to live here and will face the reality check eventually, in which case, I hope they can still enjoy and contribute to our society if they want to stay. I think there's obviously terrible visitors once in a while, like the Logan Paul thing a while ago, but for the most part I think weebs try to be respectful. too much sometimes, and support our economy via merch sales and tourism. There is definitely racism and sexism mixed in there, but I don't think it's entirely their fault either. They get that misconception from the products Japan creates. It's their fault for not doing more research, though. Sorry for the long rant, but I really had to get that off my chest. What sucks is I do want to visit Japan but don't want to be judged as an American neckbeard. It seems like a really cool place to go though. It is. Just follow the customs they have and be polite. Not living in Japan, but when I visited and was walking around the anime and game district, IDK the name, there was this girl in a maid outfit handing out flyers for their maid cafe. Some fat weeb looking new fucker kept following her, talking in his half English half Japanese, and every time she was like, oh okay anyway, and kept walking to other people for the flyers, and this creep just kept following her as if they're hanging out. The girl was obviously not comfortable. I don't wanna use stereotypes, but imagine a fat long haired anime shirt wearing guy. Probably a mod on Reddit to head. Not living in Japan, but was waiting in line at a Chiron in Tokyo. While waiting to order pay for their instant signature ramen, this tourist woman ordered a good number of boxes and checking out. What was upsetting was that she was rushing the cashier when he was doing the best he can already. She even asked if they would give her a free box or two since she bought a good amount. Kept begging after the worker said no. If you know the culture, they are already really accommodating and work to give the best experience. So when people try and take advantage of that, grinds my gears. I feel like part of the way a neckbeard is classified suggests social ineptitude, which in my experience rarely translates to foreign travel. It's the extroverts who can just show up to a pub in England and make friends with locals that do the most traveling. While it's true a lot of these individuals might idolize Japanese culture, the stereotype doesn't tend to include a whole lot in the way of bravery, which I think is necessary when it comes to going to unfamiliar places far outside the comfort zone. When I visited Japan, my partner at the time felt like it was cultural appropriation for us to be visiting the temples and doing things like cleansing before entering. I said it wasn't. We were appreciating it and being respectful. Then we saw a white girl in a ninja costume doing Naruto poses and I said now that I'm not so sure about. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.